Right. So as I mentioned, what we're going to be looking at is basically a few models of communication. There are in this process, there are 4 or 5 elements that we normally look at. So there's a sender. If you look at the current situation that we are obviously conversing, I'm the sender in this case. The speech or the talk that I'm doing is basically the message. You on the other side are the receiver, and obviously the questions or the queries or the talk that you do with us in our conversation kind of constitutes a feedback. So this is the basic communication model, and what we are going to look at is how the various elements of this model, are then deciphered in a bit later in different situations when we use, different types of communication. Some of the elements which have been defined further, things like the process of talking in this case is basically the process of communication. The nature of communication can be visual. Sometimes we do use body language, gestures, and we also, make a combination of these for communicating effectively. So that's the nature. It could be practical, visual. It could be with the use of body language. In our case, we're using a digital media for communication at this moment, which is using a web meeting platform called Join Me. Now, the communication, as you understand, can only be complete if it is done in a manner and also presented in a way wherein the sender is able to communicate the things that the person wants to do, and on the other side, you're able to understand the message in the same exact manner as it is intended, and that has the ability which is called the understanding ability, and that kind of also completes the communication at some stage.
Yeah.
We also look at things in some cases when the communication becomes complex. So, for example, if you imagine a scenario wherein you're entering a care home or a surgery or a hospital, you'll also have a lot of pictures and symbols which will also communicate complex information to you. A simple one would be you see a mobile phone and there's a cross next to it, which means the use of mobile phone is not allowed within these premises. So these are various elements that you will get to see which, form the communication model of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're having this conversation, at this particular time, which is between 2 and 2:30. So time is a relevant context in terms of considering when you do communication. And certainly the whole process can only be effective if somebody is speaking and on the other side somebody is receiving, but the whole process has the intention of you transmitting something and the other person able to receive and understand that particular message constitutes effectiveness in the communication model. Now, there are different models which have been proposed over the years, and they are then applied, in different situations and in different contexts. So we have all these models in the slides that I'll cover, but I'll try and focus on 1 or 2. One of the models we look at, the first model is the Aristotles Model. Now, the basic elements in the communication, between 4 and 5 different elements from the sender to the receiver and the feedback, they will be in each of these models in a different way. And there's a slight bit of additional focus or a role, an important role, maybe one of the elements kind of assumes an important role over the others, and that's why the implementation of these models is done in different situations, depending on what kind of situation you're in. This particular model, which is the Aristotle model, kind of focuses predominantly on the speaker and the speech. And if you are watching, the American elections, or if you're tuned into the American elections, what you'll normally get to see is this is an example of Aristotle's model, wherein the presidential candidates are participating in a debate, and obviously the main concentration is the main focus or the important role is on the presenter and the person who's actually doing the interview. So the speaker and the speech are of importance, and this kind of a model is normally you get to see in public speaking or in seminars or trainings wherein you're one-to-many kind of communication, and the main process originates and closes with the presenter or the person who's actually making the speech in this case. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Then there's another model called AlaskaELLs Model, and in this model, you will look at communication wherein it happens in a situation wherein you are in a multicultural or in a domain wherein there are different types of people available which come across or hail from different cultures and different backgrounds. And sometimes when you do these communications, you use this model is because you do not want to either offend or negatively transmit a message to a particular type of in a particular context to a particular type of people, because this can be perceived in a sense wherein you are saying something but it is being perceived on the other side or interpreted on the other side in a very different way. So imagine a situation wherein you are say for example in a religious setting, say for example at a temple, in a church. Normally, because there are people which come across with different types of faith and varying abilities to interpret their own faith, your message in that kind of a situation has to be very controlled, and it has to have the same meaning which then is transmitted, and the receivers on the other side, to all of them, irrespective of the background and culture they come from, they're able to understand the message in the very similar manner. So this type of a model is used, and I'll give you an example towards the end of the presentation wherein this kind of a model is used in that particular situation wherein you want your communication to be very controlled and you want the communication to have some sort of effect which represents the views that you are putting forward in front of an audience as more or less as an expert. Now, it could be from a point of view of an example here would be, you look at the Office of National Statistics, they do, or the Bank of England, for example, they do a lot of meetings once a quarter to basically talk about the fiscal instruments like the rate of inflation, the exchange rate, and things like that. And because they're addressing, and this kind of a communication that they do can have effect on obviously wide-ranging types of people, society, and in general the economy, there the message is quite controlled. They restrict to a certain extent the interpretation of the message, and in that kind of a message you will normally get to see that they normally give out press handouts so that the whole presentation from the Bank of Governor or one of the members of the Bank of England who's giving the presentation is also explained in terms of what are the effects and what are the connotations and what are the future impact of this is going to happen if this is changing. So we'll look at this particular model in particular when you look at in the health and social care context as well a bit later.
Yeah.
There are other models which I will not go through in detail, but there's another model called Beaver model, and this model basically focuses on trying to have an effective communication, and you get to see this typically happening within the context wherein you have a conversation with using a communication channel. So it could be something like say for example a telephone, a conversation between an employee and an employer, and that's a concentrated process of having that communication wherein nobody else is involved. So each channel is quite clear. It has only an effect on the receiver, and what tends to then happen is some of these communications which happen use a medium of communication, something which is use of a meeting platform. Message is directly a particular receiver. The key point to note is that because it uses a medium of communication to transmit the message, sometimes there is an element of noise, which is nothing but interference, which could be detected within this particular model. So here would be, if you consider, for example, if you radio while you're driving in the,
Sorry,
you're tuned to a particular.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can.
Yours is a bit crackly. I keep losing you. You sort of keep coming in and out.
Right. Okay. Let me. Is it a bit better now?
I That's a bit better.
Okay. This particular model, if you imagine a scenario wherein you're driving a car and you're listening to a radio. Now, sometimes you're within the coverage area and sometimes you're out of the coverage area. But because you're listening to a particular channel, maybe you're listening to a music channel, then in that case, what tends to happen is you're tuned into that channel and you're receiving the communication in a way wherein it is more or less one way. So you're tuned into the channel, you're listening in, and you're enjoying the music. Sometimes when you are out of coverage or you're driving maybe wherein the coverage of the signal is quite less, you tend to get something called an interference or noise, wherein either the signal breaks up, or in that case you lose the signal for the radio, for that particular channel. And what tends to happen is you have a basic loss of transmission. So in some cases, when you're using electronic medium as a medium to communicate a message, there is this particular model which is put into practice. There are other models wherein there's another model which is called the Scarr model, which typically is used in a situation wherein the information is being conveyed, but it is being conveyed by a particular person or a source, and the concentration is on the fact that you are trying to reach a particular audience for a particular purpose. So in this case, if you imagine a situation wherein sometimes you get to hear, let's put it this way, let's look at the process wherein, so for example, if there's a war happening and there is a siren which basically goes off in the city to warn you of aerial bombing which is happening. Now, in that case, the main symbol of communication for the audience is that they need to be able to understand what is being intended from that communication. So the siren actually going off in the background basically signals that there is an aerial bombardment happening, so you need to take cover. So in those kind of cases, we will normally use or interpret a communication model, which is something called the Scarr model of communication.
Right.
There are other models like a Reilly model, in which you need to assume, say, a situation wherein you're in a classroom and the teacher breaks you up into a number of groups, and what they do is they ask you to do a particular task, but the group is supposed to be presenting. So you will normally get to see communication happening in groups, and at times you will also see communication within the groups happening micro communication. So if you and me are in the same group and we have two other students in the same group, at some point in time we might have a communication between you and me, but I might also communicate with the people in the other group as well. So this communication model primarily looks at small sets of conversation happening within groups, and the group then form a bigger group, and then you have a message going in from the sender to the receiver, and there are other exchanges of messages happening in terms of communication. A simple example of this is say group discussion in a class. So you put 3 or 4 students in a group and you have 3-4 groups in the class. You will normally get to see small conversations happening within the group, but also inter-group communication happening amongst themselves to be able to, kind of understand a task or an activity which has been given. We have another model called a Aristotles Model, and this model of communication takes into account the emotional aspect of the message. Imagine a situation wherein you've gone to the surgery and the doctor needs to, kind of break a piece of news to you. So in his model of communication, or his model of this particular, he needs to break a news to you, for example, of a test which has happened, and they would use then this particular kind of model of communication wherein the doctor's message would be, assuming if it's a serious message, it would be a bit, emotional. It might look at things wherein the person receiving the message on the other side might react, and those kind of situations, would typically look at this model. A breaking news, for example, which is of a natural disaster, could be looking at this model. Sometimes you do get to see on the news presenters typically would read out a piece of news with a bit of empathy and emotion, because it is concerned to either a loss of life or something serious in terms of a damage. And those are the situations wherein you will normally see the source, the message, and the channel and the receiver actually having a bit of an emotional aspect and a reaction with regards to the message being communicated. We'll also look at one of the last models, which is the contemporary models. This particular model of communication, incorporates all the elements that we have seen in the communication process, and each of the element has a definitive role to play within the process of communication. So the contemporary model of communication kind of amalgamates all the good things of different models into one, and gives the process all the elements wherein they kind of divide every element into every element of the process of communication has a definitive role to play within this particular process. So the communicator is quite distinct. In this case, I would give you an example of a scenario wherein you need to visualize that there's an event happening, and the event could be a music gig that is happening within an auditorium or a hall. And when the lead singer comes in, he is the main communicator of the message, but the encoding, the transmittance, and obviously the receiving of the message happens within that particular hall or that auditorium, and each of them play a very individual and a significant role in getting that message across. So the infrastructure, which is the sound system, for example, you look at, would be the one which will be looking at encoding the message, which is the song or the lyrics of the song. And then is the hall itself, the physical infrastructure, the acoustics in the hall would be constituting the medium. The people in the hall who are enjoying that particular performance will become will constitute the receiver. And then when the emotions of the receiver are decoded, that means imagine somebody's jumping in the hall, they are enjoying the music. That is the bit which is being decoded. So they are experiencing the message, and then the feedback goes back in the form of some sort of reaction or elevations in terms of the audience being happy back to the communicator. Is a scenario wherein you'll typically observe a contemporary model of communication. Is that okay?
Yeah. Got that.
Good stuff. Okay, now there are different forms of communication we look at, and I think we've gone through, we've seen these forms of communications. There could be written, there could be, verbal communications. In some cases, we'll also look at visual communication. And then we also look at another categorization, which is electronic, the use of emails nowadays that you get to see, fax, which is diminishing, but yes, it's an electronic form of communication. The web meeting, the video conferencing that you do, is an electronic form of communication. So all these categories, what we've done is we've listed them out as advantages and as disadvantages. So just run through some of these slides, and they are self-explanatory.
Yeah.
We also look at categorizing communication as formal and informal. So you're writing a letter to a council, and you're writing a letter to maybe a friend. That would constitute formal communication, but formal written communication in a way. And when you're writing a letter to your friend, that is again formal communication, but maybe written in an informal manner or a fashion wherein it will constitute written informal communication. So again, a bit of categorization just to refresh that these are the forms that we normally use. Your formal, informal.
Yeah.
And then we also have written, verbal, and visual communication. Now in this process, what we do get to observe is that there is something which is called the 7 C's model, which make the communication effective. And these are then briefly defined, in terms of definitions, that what is clarity, completeness, conciseness, consideration, concreteness. So an example is, if I want to communicate something in an office environment, wherein I want the message to be understood coming across from the senior management, and you want all the employees to understand the message, you normally would send out an office memo, And that memo will have a very concrete message of, an example here would be an HR department, which calculates the number, they calculate your wages at the end of the month, depending on the number of off days and days that you've attended in the office. But what the HR manager gets to normally see is that the employees do not always end up filling the holiday form. And this then leads to a bit of delay while processing the, the wages or the salaries at the end of the month. So what the memo from the HR department will be specifically talking about will be concrete message, which will be saying that if you apply for a holiday or apply for a leave, you need to fill in this form, and this form needs to then be dropped off with one of the designated persons, so that the message in this is quite clear. They need to do this to be able to get this, for example, get this thing done. So sometimes in messages that we create, or the messages originate from us all the time. But sometimes when we have these messages going across, we have to look at the, some of these basic aspects of the messages which constitute the 7 C's. And if the message is not clear, or if it's not complete, then at times it is not understood well, and it creates conflicts, and it creates something called, the concept or the phenomenon of miscommunication, which means that people understand things differently and they do things differently, and the end goals and objectives at some point in time are different to the ones which have been set by the management. So looking at the other two, which is courtesy and correctness, a case in point in terms of courtesy would be, I normally would put it this way, that you have a situation at home wherein you have guests coming in, and you're receiving the guest. Your message has to be quite courteous. You want to make them feel welcome in terms of when they're coming over for dinner or something, and your communication has to be, when you send out a card, if it's a birthday party or a birthday invite, you send out something which is quite courteous, and the message is quite clear. Starts at this time, finishes at that time. This is the flow of the order of the day would be on that particular day, and everybody then tends to understand that okay, you can drop your kids off at 4:30, pick them up at 6:30, but between the 4:30 and the 6:30, you have a timetable which is quite clear and it's quite concise, so that everybody understands that okay, this is how the entire birthday party or the event is going to run. So 7 C's of effective communication is something that we look at, which completes the process of communication and makes it effective at the end of the day. And sometimes I get to see that you talk, you obviously have a conversation with somebody in the office and you want certain things done, but towards the end of the week you find that the message has not been understood clearly and the work has not been done, is because of the 7 C's not working effectively, or your message in terms of your communication not being quite clear enough that you want this report at the end of the week or before Friday. And that is where the message then gets dropped off. The sender has done the communication, but the receiver has not interpreted the message correctly, and that is the slip between the cup and the lip, and the report doesn't come on the table.
Yeah.
Right. This particular slide is not very clear, but it talks about barriers to effective communication. All the elements that we have spoken about in the communication process, which is, I think, in the slide, if I just scroll very briefly, which is in slide 5, can also at some point in time become barriers to effective communication. And that is what has been depicted here in this slide. And we briefly talk about the barriers. So for example, if currently I'm speaking English, but if I suddenly start speaking French, there's a difference in the language. And you get to see this, that some companies, when they have a website and they want to advertise their products and services, if they are selling their products and services in different countries, what they then tend to do is basically have a website wherein there is a choice available with the browser to be able to translate into a particular language, because they want the message to be understood, the products and services that they're providing to be understood quite clearly. But if that is not available, somebody logging in or trying to browse the website does not understand English, then the language itself can become a barrier, for promoting your products and services in a particular country. Sometimes you also get to see that if you have too many questions being asked, that becomes a barrier to effective communication. And a simple example of this would be if you're in a training seminar, what tends to happen is the trainer will always request you to ask questions towards the end of the presentation, so that the presentation, his or her presentation rhythm is not broken, and she or he is able to communicate the message across to the people attending the seminar clearly. So interjection or to asking too many questions at some point in time can become a barrier to effective communication. Distance does. Can you think of an instant where distance becomes a barrier?
Well, in my line of work, perhaps actually just the physical distance, somebody being over the other side of the room or something. But I'm assuming things like if people are in another country and you're trying to communicate with them using the correct medium, I suppose.
That is correct, yeah. So when you look at the situation wherein you look at the National Health Service in particular, which has about, say, 20 odd trusts and different hospitals, but all the other surgeries and A&Es get being connected, you get to see that at some point in time, the communication from the head office or from the base hospital going across to different places has different meanings. And this is primarily because of distance. So I might look at my routine because I work within a particular department of 9 to 5, but that might have a very different, translation when I work in a distance location office, for example, a remote or a satellite office, and I might start at 9:30 and finish at 5 or 4:30, and that might still be okay as far as that particular satellite location is concerned. So sometimes distance does become a barrier. And this is normally seen in situations wherein you have employees or staff working across in different offices, and the interconnectivity between the offices is not that great. So, for example, most of them would have telephone lines or email, but at times when newsletters or monthly updates are given out from the management, the printed copies might not reach the office, a satellite office, on time, and they might. If it's something which they expect all employees to respond to, but by the time the communication is reached, the deadline is already passed. So, for example, a traditional case is the case wherein companies, when they allow employees to, they advertise a position or an opening within the organization for their own employees to apply. And if it's not been put up on the website or has not been publicized, then because of distance, sometimes it does happen is that the HR department ends up receiving complaints saying that, okay, we had so many employees which wanted to apply for this role, but the information was not available on time. And that kind of then constitutes, because of the distance, a barrier. There are other barriers like lack of interest, distractions, disability, time, and in some cases noise, which does tend to happen when we do the conference at times, because I would either get an echo or the connection is not good, and sometimes this interference then constitutes something called noise, and it also can be interpreted as a barrier to effective communication. So this was one of the.
You'd have environment under noise as well, wouldn't you?
Yes, that is correct.
I mean, if you're having a meeting or something, your environmental factors will come into consideration about the barriers to effective communication.
That is absolutely correct as well. Yeah, they will come into. They will also constitute, I would say, barriers to effective communication. Having a bit of background noise in terms of if you're having a meeting in a room and there is suddenly a birthday celebration happening outside and you get to hear a bit of noise. So obviously that constitutes the environment, and yes, that will also become a barrier in terms of, for communication or maybe a presentation which is happening within that conference room when you're doing it.
Yeah. So
this bit, I'm going to upload on the learner management system. It basically gives you a slide, it's an overview of things that we already know in specific, and the idea of putting these slides up is to just refresh some of the things that we are aware of and are also a part of the learning outcome, one in particular. Now, the other thing that I would want to basically look at very, very briefly at this moment would be, I'm going to be uploading an ebook on managing communication. So Denise, just to look at, how we would run most of the courses would be that we will do the theory or the overview of the course predominantly through the PowerPoint slides as you get to see today. And then for the practice bit, what I would do is I would drop you, or the tutor will drop you an email to say, okay, refer to this particular ebook, pages so and so, and that will give you all the nitty-gritty about the topics in detail.
Right, okay.
And then towards the end, what we will do is we will probably look at, in most cases, a small bit of a case scenario to try and kind of, bring everything together in terms of what's been talked about. And that will kind of be an example of kind of rounding it off for that particular task or the learning outcome. So in this case, when we look at, what we've gone through today, a small case scenario is that what we are looking at is here a customer, a dad, who's taken a day off from the office and has ordered a printer off Amazon, and the printer hasn't arrived. So he's taken a day off. He has ordered a printer on Amazon, and he wants to set it up for his daughter's birthday. Now, there is a bit of a communication role play that we will get to see, which will happen. So that we call the situation as an irate customer. That means the customer is absolutely unhappy because he hasn't received the delivery. And on the side, what we're going to see is the customer services agent or somebody from the customer services department is actually going to give the customer a call, and he or she is going to, in this case, she is going to start the conversation, explain the situation to the customer, and then she is going to use one of the communication models to be able to explain the situation, salvage the reputation of the company, and also at the end of it, create a customer delight by offering some free gift vouchers and a free toner in this case. So which model do you think will apply here in this particular situation?
Using the models that you just explained to me.
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to look back through them.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's absolutely okay. So, this is basically a situation wherein what we are looking at is a particular model, like a contemporary model, which will get applied. Yeah, which will have all the elements actually working into it, and you will get to see that the customer services agent will actually patiently listen to the customer first, let the customer actually vent a bit of frustration, as you can see in this, and then go back and use a bit of empathy and use a bit of emotion to try and explain that, it's not just yourself, but there are a lot of other deliveries which have been affected because the DPD lorry or the truck which was supposed to deliver has actually broken down, and we've received the information at such and such time. We do apologize, and at the end of the day, what she's going to try and do is console the customer and then say that, yes, I can relate to your situation, but there's nothing much that I can do at this moment. But she would then kind of go and offer maybe some sort of a gift voucher or a freebie to try and console the customer, saying that, okay, the printer is going to be delivered tomorrow, and in addition to that, we will give you a gift voucher for so and so, and hopefully she will try and resolve the situation, which will be a win-win both for the company, but also to console the customer and not let the customer go away from further ordering or further purchases from Amazon in the future.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Literally literally just to kind of squeeze in with a particular situation. Now there is an activity which is in the assignment brief which kind of puts a similar scenario.
Yeah.
And that similar scenario basically paints the picture wherein you are looking at using one of the theories or models of effective communication to explain that particular task.
Right. Okay.
So if I just very briefly look at, this is the assignment brief for the managing communication unit. And if I look at task 1.1, what they've done is they've given a particular scenario here of a training package wherein you are trying to create, you're trying to disseminate information and knowledge to, your colleagues within the organization. And then you are given a set of tasks to do, and those tasks can be accomplished by producing a handout or an information sheet.
Yeah.
And when you produce those information sheets or tasks for your colleagues, what you're looking at doing is basically covering these tasks in the assignment brief. So what we can correlate to is something that we've covered today, which is the explanation of system used for communicating this information and knowledge, and the bit which is the analysis of the potential and real barriers to effective workplace communication. So these tasks kind of directly correlate to the presentation slide that we have, we've gone through today.
Okay.
Is that okay?
So I've got to use a model of communication in order to complete these tasks.
That is correct, yes.
Is it the one I think it is, or which I think would be most appropriate to use?
It will be the most appropriate to use considering this scenario which has been given to give you a context for doing the tasks in activity 1. So you're assuming that you're trying to deliver the first part of the training package, and with that assumption in mind that you are looking at creating something called handouts which will be given to delegates within the training. You have to look at picking up the appropriate model. So obviously you will not be able to pick up the contemporary model or the Aristotle's model, because yes, it's a training scenario wherein the trainer is going to be actually delivering the training, but you'll have to pick up the model wherein the trainer is doing kind of a public speaking, but at some stage the trainer will invite feedback from the people within the hall, and those information handouts and sheets will allow you to use maybe the most appropriate model of communication to do these tasks. Does that make sense?
No, sorry, I got lost a bit. So if I'm using, obviously I'm going to need a model of communication where I'm using handouts. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, the assignment basically asks you to produce under activity 1. They are asking you to kind of produce a handout, and the handout that you use is primarily having a context or a scenario wherein they're asking you to assume that you are going to be delivering a training, and when you are going to be delivering a training to a number of people within the hall or the setting, you are required to produce a handout or an information sheet which will actually be given to the delegates who are going to be attending the training.
Right, okay.
Right. Now, when you're doing these tasks, which are listed here under the bullet points, what you're going to be doing is obviously using a bit of theory, which is from the unit managing communication. And the theory that you're going to be using is you're looking at things that we have covered today, things like what is the communication model, what are the types of models of communication, the barriers to effective communication, the things that we have covered today. You will pick out maybe the most appropriate model which will apply to the context of training and training delegates, and then answer the tasks.
Training and training delegates. So it might be something like one of the controlled models, like the AlaskaELLs Model, is it, or something? Is it called?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yes. So you're looking at a communication model. You're spot on, which is more or less a control model, because you are doing the training. They are there to attend the training for a day or two, and you want the people to go away with a clear message and a clear, clear enhancement in their skills after getting the training. So you will need to use a model which is appropriate to that particular situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to upload this particular part of the presentation onto the unit, and I'm also going to upload a book on managing communication, which is an ebook that you'll find under the unit 5.5. And I'll drop you an email which will tell you exactly the pages that you have to read between, which will directly correspond to the content that we have covered today, which is communication systems and potential barriers.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So I just need to pick one. I just need to pick one model. I don't need to do any more than one, no?
Model. I think in some cases you might two, because when you look at the analysis, you will only be able to do analysis if you have more than one model.
Oh, right. So you want me to pick two models? Do I have to do a handout on? No, I only have to do a handout on these. Oh, okay, yeah, I think I get you. So, and then I'll pick two models, and then I'll do an overall analysis of which model would be the better one to use.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah.
So in this case, this particular assignment, this particular unit that you look at, if I give you some guidance, my guidance to you will be that this is a unit which allows you to bring in a bit of creativity. So instead of doing reports, or as we do standard assignments of Word document, we can actually do some of the tasks in the assignment given or the activities given as bits and pieces of by bringing in different forms of assessment. So for example, I might do an information sheet, or I might do a handout which is designed as a training handout, like an agenda for the training. For example, a simple example would be that to assume that you're delivering this training, and what you do is, the first thing that you do is when the delegate actually get into the room, what you do is you hand over a training pack to them, and the training pack, if open, that training pack typically has maybe the agenda for the day, some sort of a timesheet, which is the agenda of the day. Then followed by that, some of the key aspects that you're going to be covering in the training have maybe some individual handouts. So you're looking at producing a particular handout, which is a Word document. Don't get me wrong. We're not asking you to do, create something using Photoshop or things like that, but just a normal Word document. But it kind of looks and feels like a handout that you're doing rather than, a written assignment.
So do I have to do a particular course? I'll have to, in order to produce a handout, I need to sort of put a course together, do I?
No. You don't need to. The situation of the situation given in the activity 1 is basically to give you a scenario or a context to be able to do these tasks.
Right. So the scenario already there.
That is. Yeah. If you see the context at the start of the assignment, they have given you a context saying that this is what you're looking at doing. You're working within a training organization. You're one of the trainers or consultants who actually delivers trainings within the organizations. And obviously, from that context, you have to start visualizing yourself as a trainer, and then produce some of these activities. Some of the tasks in the activities have to be produced that way.
Right, so it says here managing workplace communication. So I've got to do something on managing workplace communication.
Ideally, yes.
Right, okay.
So maybe
I'm putting a training package together basically on how to manage workplace communication.
Yes. So if I have to understand this, what will happen is, as you can see in the assignment, there are, I think, 3 activities in total. So the idea of giving you the context is, when you have done these 3 activities, the output which has been produced would kind of look like a full training package. Right? So in activity 1, you're primarily producing something like a Word document. In activity 2, again, it's a bit of a combination of a Word document. And in activity 3, you're normally looking at producing a PowerPoint presentation. So when I put the 3 of them together, so there'll be like a few pages in activity 1, few pages in activity 2, and a PowerPoint presentation that will look like a training package.
Right, okay, activity 3, so PowerPoint, yeah.
Is that okay? And when you look at, I think there's a bit of a cheat sheet that we normally let go in the assignments, is guidelines for assessors, which is on page 3. Now, if you normally read this as a learner, you will understand that what the assessor will be actually looking at when you produce the activity or do the assignment.
Okay,
So,
right.
so here, if you look at the LO1, which is tasks 1.1 to 1.3, in particular,
Yeah.
just on that because I've only done part of LO1 today, is that what we are asking the learners to be able to do is we are asking them to actually demonstrate that they have a good understanding of workplace communication.
Yeah.
So they will be asked to consider a broad range of stakeholders, which I'm going to cover in the second session, and a range of different organizations. The material must demonstrates learners' understanding of role and importance of systems, blah, blah, blah. And then the material provided should be drawn on personal experiences or case studies and things like that. So here, what we're looking at, if I just kind of read the important words, we're looking at you being able to demonstrate how workplace communication happens. It happens through emails, it happens verbally, it happens facially, you know, it happens formally, informally, all those types of things. We are looking at you understanding stakeholders, different stakeholders within the organization, which is things like sometimes we have customers, we have employees, we have suppliers. So those are the stakeholders. We are also at some stage looking at potential barriers of communication. So those are the barriers that we have discussed will actually come across. This, in general, when you do, will be covered in all these different tasks. As you can see, an analysis of potential barriers to effective workplace communication. So I will also upload a draft, you know, for you to have a look at how maybe previous year students have produced, you know, this particular work. Some of them have chosen to do a handout of the organization, say, for example, a newsletter, and that newsletter basically has bits and pieces of, you know, things which are the activities related to the assignment. Some of them have gone down the route of just doing a normal Word report. That means they've taken up the task 1 and they've started with a bit of theory, they've explained a bit of practice, and they've taken an example of their organization or their prior experience of working within the organization.
Okay.
So what I would do is obviously encourage you to do a draft, and you know, we just do 1 or 2 activities. We've only covered task 1.1 and 1.2 today. So maybe encourage you to do a bit of a draft after going through the presentation again, and also the pages and the books that I would do, and then maybe do a draft and then give you some feedback in terms of whether you're on the right lines or, you know, what's required to be done.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that okay? Good stuff. Conscious of the time, I think we've over. You would be. Yeah. It's already 3 o'clock, so.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for your patience, and obviously I'll catch up with you tomorrow. Sorry, next Friday.
Next week. Yeah. Okay then. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you.
Bye.